Welcome. Hello, Birgitta. How are
Hi,
you?
I'm really good.
And where are you right now?
I'm currently in Iceland, in Reykjavik, at my
Okay.
home. I'm
I
sort
have
of,
to say, you have a great room there.
thank you. Yeah, I mean, I finally got to have my own flat, so I can do whatever I want with it. I used to be renting all the time, but it's impossible in Iceland right now. So,
I know this feeling when you
so
have your
I
own
just,
place. I'm not in my own place right now either. So look, this conversation is going to be about you and your thoughts and your opinions, but just so we're transparent and everyone knows what, my viewpoint is, I'm doing research for a film, and it's trying to help explain how technology and general trends are changing society through the prism of how it's going to affect individuals in their work life and their family life and their private life. So I'm going to try and kind of keep the conversation around that. And this was born out of looking at how blockchain and AI and other new tech and the businesses that run them might change society. So that's the kind of viewpoint that I'm coming from, more than anything else. So enough about me. Tell me, could you first of all actually just give me a name check and tell me what you call yourself to the outside world?
okay, so my name is Birgitta Jónsdóttir. I know it's very hard to pronounce. So I am sort of an activist and a poetician. I have started two parties out of nothing, and I have now left party politics. I got these parties into parliament, and I have learned what I need to know. I guess I'm a natural born hacker.
Okay, all right, that's a good answer. So actually, really quick question about that. I was on your Twitter yesterday. Initially said you were going to retire in 2020, and I saw your tweet in, I think, late December saying you've retired. Have you actually left Parliament, or so you're not going to finish out your term, you've left and you've actually
No,
left?
we're having like this political. I'm sorry, you broke up. But anyways, we're having political crisis in Iceland, and so my term was supposed to be until 2020, but there were unexpected elections because yet another scandal, involving the traditional parties. This time the Conservative Party, before it was the Progressive. Ironically, they're both now in government again. But so we only had like 1 year last term. And I decided that I would not run because I had said I would only be 2 terms, but indeed I was actually into my third, because the other term also fell short because of the Panama Papers. And I felt it was irresponsible to leave the ship because I wanted to share what I had learned, so the new MPs in my party didn't have to sort of learn everything from scratch. Because indeed, once you're within the power structures, they are not very keen to show you how things really work. It's sort of like a Yes Minister is a documentary, not a comedy.
That's good to know. So look, before we dive into like subjects, for want of a better word, I'd love to get a sense of you and who you are and what your viewpoints are. Kind of reading up about you, you're quite a rock and roll politician, and I guess you're also quite rare. That on one side you're quite you've got quite radical, quite different viewpoints that a lot of people in the kind of middle ground might find extreme. But on the other hand, you work with NATO and you work with the EU and you're a member of a national parliament. So without kind of maybe going too much into your life story, you're a poet and a politician. You've been a programmer or a web developer. And I know you, like, I've just been reading stuff about your early boyfriends and being an activist. And could you tell me a little bit about who you are and what motivates you and drives you, and what are the things in your life that kind of make you who you are?
Wow. Okay. So I grew up in a fishing village. I was born in the city, but my mother got married when she was 16. She had me when she was 19. She was a pioneer in, making her own music and performing it as a sort of a troubadour. She made music to some of our greatest poets. My father was a captain, my adopted father. My blood father was insane, but he was a brilliant artist.
So a very creative background.
Very. And very sort of, in particular, the women in my family were very strong. They did, you know, I've never experienced it was any kind of difficulty for me to be a woman, if you know what I mean. Even if I've really gone into a male-oriented sort of environments, like, you know, web development back in '95, it was only guys and me. But I grew with that, you know, I could do whatever I wanted to do and whatever I wanted to be. And there were no obstacles except in my head. And so that was very good for me to sort of start off from there.
If I can interrupt for a second, do you think that's because of your parents and your upbringing, or do you think it's also about being in Iceland and that views are different there, or?
No, I don't think it has anything to do with Iceland, really. I think it's a lot of factors, you know, and, you know, often, like, I remember I translated this sort of semi-New Age book called The Four Agreements, which has a very good sort of explanation about how we choose to deal with situations and how the power of words, you know, I'm really fascinated with words. And so how one word, even if it's just a word in our head, that somebody can actually make you or break you based on this word. And I'm a big fan of Alan Moore, who among other things wrote V for Vendetta, but many other brilliant stories. And, you know, for me, there is no more black or white magic as words. And I grew up with that, and I understood the power of words when I was very young. I was, of course, and I've just realized, because my younger son was diagnosed finally, he's like just turned 17 with Asperger, and I was researching Asperger. And I realized that I am an Asperger, like him, and it's really sort of really helped me understand so many things about myself. And it's amazing that I'm still alive, because it was so hard to, like, one of the things you have as an Asperger is a very strong, inflated sense of ethics. And the only times I really become angry is when people abuse that sense of trust in regards to ethics. And can you imagine to be in politics like this? It's just been a nightmare. I feel so free to have gotten out of it.
Make me think I probably need to look at myself and see if I'm on the scale, but that's really interesting.
It is, and also just this sort of ability to go deep into things. And this is one of the things I've done. I'm totally self-made in every aspect of the word. I did not feel, you know, I got really good grades when I was a kid. And I just did not like the education system. So I basically tried it in college or high school, and I thought, oh, man, this is just so much waste of time, because I know what I want to be when I grow up. And I'm not learning that here. So I just self-educated myself. And then I started to believe that I could, you know, if I wanted to do something or learn something, it was just a matter of willpower. And so I willed myself into, like, I don't know anything about computers when I started to make web pages back in '95, straight into Telnet. But I was given, and talking about words, like, one of the pioneers in doing this in Iceland, I asked him, can you teach me? And he basically said, I can't teach you this. The only thing, I can tell you a few things, but you have to go and look at the source of the web pages you feel that are functioning or beautiful. And this is what I did. And then I realized that this was really a tool that could completely transform the world. This was a way to actually, you know, and it was actually funny. And I'm sorry I'm going from one thing to another. I was just watching an interview with the Elon or the Musk brothers when they were talking about their first business back in '95, which was very much based on the same feeling that I had when I started also my own sort of web developing company back in '95, '96. I realized that you could have a huge impact on Like it was a massive tool to improve humanity and interconnect people. And I remember I was invited to speak at Rhode Island University about interpersonal and interspace, because I used to have like one of the most personal web pages you could find. And I got all sorts of awards and stuff because I was really using this sort of creative thinking within technology. But my driving point, and this is why I find your project so interesting, my driving point was I could already see back in '96 that this was having a very positive impact on a lot of parts of society that was impossible to do before we sort of interconnected like this. And I sort of felt like we were manifesting in some way or materializing the subconscious, that we were all interconnecting on a level never before. And thus an idea born in Iceland was maybe being born at the same time in Australia. But the difference today is that you can have these minds communicate, and thus the development of this idea is going to be much quicker. And so I've also said we're living at these sort of times of quickening where things happen very quickly. And then you also have to make sure that it's rooted in history, because if you don't understand that when you are accelerating so quickly and the road is wet, you're going to get off, you know. And that is what we're seeing with, you know, the incredible speed of the abuse of artificial intelligence and algorithms and so forth. And, you know, I just had a meeting with the Prime Minister of Iceland this week, and we're talking about this project that I launched back in 2009-10 called the Icelandic Modern Media Initiative, to sort of make Iceland into a digital safe haven for all the forbidden knowledge that those in power would very much like to influence what part of that is accessible to us, the rest of us, the minions. And I was discussing with her, look, it's like all these years since this idea was actually unanimously adopted in the parliament. And it tackles issues like privacy, and it tackles issues like freedom of expression and the right to information from those in power. And we haven't done it yet, you know.
So
and at the same time,
10 years later, nearly, well, a number of years later, it still hasn't happened. What do you think the reasons are that it hasn't happened so far?
I think just the lack of understanding of its urgency. I mean, we've done some other things. For example, you know, because I was working with people back then, and this was another attempt to work with this tool that we call the internet in order to speed up things in one place. Like, so I was working with people from WikiLeaks, and I was working with journalists and experts in the field of these different legal examples that I was looking at that I knew that worked. And I thought it was brilliant to work with WikiLeaks back then, because they had already figured out ways to use laws in different countries to protect the data that they were leaked to them and their sources. And so instead of for people that are trying to bring data to the rest of us, for them to having to understand different legal examples in different countries, why not just have it all in one place? And so we were actually working this law, you know, on a like an Ethernet pad, or these sort of this framework for the resolution in lots of different countries, in many different continents. And, you know, I thought this could be the future of law, that we would, for example, talk about global warming legislation and best policies and practices like this. So we would look at, you know, which country would actually manage to pull together all these best legal examples in order to move forward and say, look, this country is doing this, and we just need to sort of copy paste this and remix it for our country. So
just listening to what you said there, you said we thought. That sounds like, so why not?
I haven't seen anyone do this, you know, like I've talked so much about this now for 8 years, and we are at times of quickening, and we really need to do stuff quickly. And so I've come up with a new idea because, this is the thing that I might be good at, which is just like my mind never stops. And one of the things I want to do, and I've been a little bit obsessed with, is, the fact how difficult it is to find the great laws in many different languages that actually work and that are easily adaptable within most of other countries' legal sets. And so I thought, why don't we create like just, for example, around the IMI laws and similar things like artificial intelligence and self-driving cars and net neutrality, why don't we create an international database where you get experts to translate, when needed, different laws into different languages in the legal text? Because the quicker you have the legal text in a completely transparent way, the more chances are that there are no horrible legal loopholes in it, and that if you get progressives that are trying to get into government or have gotten into government, then they can adopt these laws much quicker. And then I thought, and some people understood why this is important. And then I thought, why not create something like we have these brilliant organizations like Reporters Without Borders, Doctors Without Borders, even Clown Without Borders. Why don't we have Democracy Without Borders, where you have people that will go in and help without any strings attached, that are not sort of from like powerful countries that want to help just to get to sort of be the influencers, like we see in Kosovo, which is one of the new democracies, and in many different countries. And so this is my new sort of obsession. I don't know how far I'm going to go with it, but I think it's needed, especially now when, in particular, young people are losing faith in the democratic model. So
yeah, no, I must agree with you. I mean, the reason why I started this project was that I saw that we feel like we're at an inflection point. And to me, it feels like tech we're going from a way where we're making computers do things the way we used to do them, to computers being able to do things in a way that's very native to them. And to me, it feels like, well, that means, well, this is what I'm researching, so I don't know, but it feels like we almost have a chance like the last 300-400 years. Society was different 300-400 years ago. It's different 500 years before that. It probably will be different, and we have a choice of which way we go. So I want to show the dangers and the possibilities and let people make their own minds up. So look, you touched on like,
I'm so glad to hear that, because I'm sorry I'm butting in, but this is so great and it's so needed. And I'm also thinking, because I travel all over the world and I'm learning about so many amazing projects, and I've also worked with so many different members of parliament, and there's so few people like me that have both been inside the parliamentary structure and done a lot of international work, and people that are still really deeply rooted into the sort of the grassroots and the NGO, and can sort of speak the language of all these different worlds. And I really want to build bridges to share all this stuff that is working. There are so many amazing examples, and we so urgently need to set positive examples so people don't feel alienated or alone and give up just before it's about to sort of become reality. Because you never know when the right moment is, but you have to be prepared. That's the whole thing, and that's my whole message, is that even if it looks like it's impossible to change anything, be ready. Make the work, the hard work. It's like, just like we're told, you're never going to be good at anything unless you practice. And so why don't we practice more different models, just by discussing it and sharing what's working in other places gives us new ideas.
That's I can also see why you're a poetician, and I love the fact that I went to your political blog and there's just poetry there, and I'm like, I think also it really helps people understand subject. It's one trying to find allegories to help people understand sometimes quite nebulous concepts. But look, going back, you've touched on, like, I've got 5 pages of notes here, and you've touched on loads of them already, and I'm trying to work out where to start. So you kind of got into politics during the financial crisis, right? That was your trigger, 2007, 2008.
Mm-hmm.
So you've been a member of various parties. Actually, we'll leave that till later. But let it be said that Pirate Party in Iceland was the third biggest. So you're a mainstream politician. But you've also had problems, I know, with the US government, Hedges versus Obama, and they tried to also get your Twitter. How does it work with you being this mainstream politician, but also getting treated by other governments or other organizations as more of a fringe radical, I guess?
Well, even if I've been mainstream politician in the sense that we became popular, I'm still always French. I never really understood, and I never took it in that I was a parliamentarian, if you know what I mean. And this is a big struggle for somebody that defines herself to be an anarchist, in the sense that I really want I want myself to take responsibility on my community and my society in the fields that I'm good at. I'm not going to claim that I am going to come up with any type of solution for a lot of stuff that I find interesting and needed, but I just don't know nothing about it. And there are others that are really good at it. So I'm not, I've never taken on this role of power. People are always saying I'm a leader and stuff like that, and I never see myself like that. I want to inspire people to do stuff. So if people want to see me as a leader, I find it to be very difficult, because I want us all to be, leaders in our own right, in leadership of our own lives and destinies. But we live in a structure where everybody is looking for somebody that they can give that type of responsibility. And I'm not afraid of the responsibility, to take on all the crap and, the glory or whatever. I usually am very good at taking on crap. I don't know, but it's like when you start to see yourself, I really always to see myself as this, little girl that didn't feel at home in the fishing village. That was sort of the ugly duckling that, was always alone.
So maybe you don't feel like a leader, but you definitely have followers from what I can tell. Can you help me understand something, a really simple question, which I probably should know the answer, but I don't know if I do. Explain to me what an anarchist is, because I think it's such a emotive word. I don't actually think about it yesterday. I don't know if I really understand what it is.
Yeah, I mean, just like with everything, like whenever you ask somebody to explain capitalism or communism or socialism, everybody has their own flavor to it. So basically, anarchism, in its core is about society without the big bloated state. So, you create a society that is more of a sort of a co-op in a sense. So it is, let's say you would live in an anarchistic society, everyone would take responsibility on themselves. If there were disputes, it would be solved without somebody from outside. It would be resolved within the community, if you know what I mean. So if there is a dispute about a crime, that would be dissolved without a police and a judge. It would be resolved within the community. It's old stuff and new. And there are different types of anarchists. There are individualistic anarchists. There are like capitalistic anarchists. I don't know how it fits, really strange. There are pragmatic anarchists like me who really believe in, I'm never going to live in the society I dream of unless I can contribute to my society. So, my vision is a part, and my work is part of the community I live in.
The way you describe that, it doesn't also sound that far away from libertarianism, which I know. So I'm in London today. I normally live in the US, where I've lived the last 10 years. Anarchism is a dirty word, but libertarianism is like seen as quite a positive word. But what you're describing to me doesn't sound that far away from libertarianism.
It is very close in many ways. And I was actually just came from Bristol, where I was at this really interesting conference on constitutional anarchism. Yes, and it was like the university in Exeter, they have like a whole department where they are working on, explaining on a deeper level, how you connect anarchism with, for example, all these calls for democratic reform and direct democracy and so forth. I mean, it's like you're never gonna make one society totally shift unless you do it then top down, and that is sort of tyranny in some ways. But there are some very interesting experimentation with this format of, anarchism or communism or whatever. And then I'm not talking about communism, but communism. And for example, in Rojava, in the Syrian Kurdistan, they're doing some very interesting experimentation inspired, among others, on the philosophy of the Marxist / then anarchistic / something new philosopher Murray Bookchin. And I really encourage people who are interested in different types of governance than the current system to look into very many different experimentations. There are some experimentations on, for example, basic income that might be interesting, but then there's also this split between the capitalistic version of it versus the social version of it. And I think you cannot have a society that's not built on the social dynamics and the social responsibility of a community. And one of the reasons I think a lot of people feel compelled to distrust the system is that, since I worked a lot within computers, I always look at the system we live in as it's the hardware that somebody built, and then we're always trying to patch it with new software. And the hardware just doesn't work anymore. We don't have any dynamics in the laws. It's very difficult to change them, and yet the laws are like our God and Savior, but usually just the judging. The laws are also interpreted. So language is like such an important thing, and I used to tell my fellow MPs, look, particularly those that were governing, I was always saying in speeches, trying to waken them up to the reality that just one flaw in the law, like not the correct wording, can have an impact on thousands of people. And people just don't seem to realize the responsibility it is around the lawmaking, and thus we should open it much more. We should make it easier for people to, let us know, the so-called lawmakers in parliament, if there is a flaw, so we can fix it, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, no, it's good. So look, I don't want to go too much into forms of government, because I think that's a whole other conversation, but I've got one personal question that I find really interesting. I personally don't know how comfortable I feel with really direct democracy, and that's partly coming from the viewpoint that I studied a lot of classical history, both at high school and at university. And I looked at the early forms of Athenian democracy and what happened in, I think it was 424 BC, where the first parliament there was direct democracy. And suasion, we talked about the power of words earlier, and powerful speakers would convince essentially kind of hysterical behavior and bad decisions. And one could argue that's what's happened with Trump, which I think most people around the world share a similar viewpoint about. Is there not a danger that people who are maybe not experts on subject matters might take emotive decisions based on conversation, based on manipulated news or powerful speakers, rather than kind of taking a more pragmatic approach to sometimes quite complex issues that need time and can't be something you watch a 5-minute video about before you take a vote on?
Absolutely, and that's why when we were looking into ways for direct democracy, it is not an absolutum, if you know what I mean. It's a path that you gradually work yourself into. So, for example, when we were doing the new constitution in Iceland, which was very much it included a lot of involvement of the general public. So you try to take the spirit of how people perceive themselves as a nation into the social agreement that people call a constitution. You did not have them write out the articles, but the people that were elected to take the spirit of how people perceive themselves and put it into a constitution. they opened the whole pathway so that people could come in with suggestions or nudge them closer to what people were calling for, if you know what I mean. It is not an absolute yes and no direct democracy is not really a direct democracy. It is, this sort of like...
so it's more participatory. It's more people
yes.
participating in more of the processes.
Exactly. So you have like the randomly selected assemblies where you go into sort of the deeper ethical questions about stuff. And community is not about asking, like John Lennon said a long time ago in an interview about democracy and governance. He basically said, people want this sort of daddy to blame for everything, which is sort of the government, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
Or, thank for, but usually just to blame. So as soon as we start to recognize that we have democracy is like a garden, and it's not enough just to plant seeds every 4 years and expect them to, grow if you don't put any water on it, or if you don't make sure that the wheat is taken care of. And so it's a process.
Is this what you did with the Accademia group? Is this the Accademia group people looking at new forms of governance, or am I confusing the issues? And is Accademia group just Icelandic, or is it international?
You're talking about the Reykjavik Accademia group. So that was just a brief group that existed just around the collapse, and it sort of dissolved itself and went into different fragmentations after the elections in 2009. So what sort of happened in Iceland, which was very interesting. So, I never wanted to get into parliament. For me, this was the last resort. It was not a dream. It was not something I had ever aspired to do. And even I remember when we were having the big protests downtown, and I very much was engaged with a lot of the groups and protests and whatnot, and petitions. So I was doing a lot of sort of citizen journalism and so forth, and help organizing big protests. But I was so much not determined to or thinking about being a politician that I was doing like an interview that was really intimate with the biggest sort of interviewer in Iceland at the time in radio. And I was talking about how I used to use drugs when I was a teenager, and how I was an anarchist and blah, blah, blah. And I just, and that's why I say to people, look, if I was organizing direct action camps and all sorts of stuff for the environmental protection, somebody like me, who other people basically said, you are never going to achieve anything in Iceland. You have rubbed all the wrong people the wrong way, can get into parliament to, try to understand how it works. For me, it was very much about that. Then anybody can. I mean, seriously, whenever people start to tell themselves they can't do something, or it's just in their head, we can achieve anything if we know where we're going. For me, that is critical to be aware of that, that there are no limitations to, our own self-destruction, or, picking up some interesting, amazing threads that we can carry on weaving together.
I'll echo that. I think people just need to start. I've got a young friend in Arizona who I knew as the kid that drunk a couple of beers, and now I'm following his Instagram as he's running for Senate or trying to, move forward. So look, moving the conversation.
And if I may add to that, because like a lot of people feel like, it's if you're an anarchist or if you are this or that, you can never run. For me, it's a very educational process. And just to run like for Senate or congressman or member of parliament or, your local community, it is so educational. You learn so much about your community and you learn so much about yourself, And so I think like when we're looking at the new ways to change society, I always come back time and time again to the fact that it's about how we relate to others and how we build our own communities. Do you know your neighbor? I often ask people. Usually people don't know them. And so, I mean, that's just a start.
Okay, with me, with my neighbours, it depends where I'm living. I've known some nodding. So look, I'm kind of maybe going to move a little bit more to practical stuff.
Yeah.
One of the things I read was that you shocked a NATO meeting when you criticised one of their reports. And from what I understand, you know, you've worked in government in communication and cyber security as well as governance. Tell me about your thoughts around cybersecurity and your work with NATO and where we are in the world around that.
Okay, so it's important to recognize that I was working with the NATO Parliamentary Assembly, which is like yet another sort of international body of parliamentarians or geopolitical, like with NATO, that work together on different issues, often to give the executive branch its legitimacy, if you know what I mean. So, but what the NATO PA does is that they do a lot of reports and stuff, and there were often really interesting panels. What I basically did was there was a report on people I know on a project that I was working on with WikiLeaks, and it was just full of errors. And I basically got the international community. I just posted it on Twitter and Facebook, and asked people to look at it and tell me, of errors. And then I got so many suggestions on errors, and I basically told the people at this committee, I basically stood up and said, look, I cannot under any circumstances acknowledge this report. It's so full of errors. And they sort of got shocked. They didn't know that I already combed through all the errors and I was ready with amendments. So I brought in 70 amendments to it in 1 hour. And, of course, it's never been done. But I had people from all over the world help me with this. And this is also how I see, how we do things differently, is that we do not, confine ourselves in our own little bubbles. And this is the biggest danger in any type of, work within the systems, is that you get stuck there. And so I try to open it and break it up. When it comes to cybersecurity, I mean, it's just like privacy. Privacy doesn't exist anymore. It's gone. It's finished. Forget it. We can't amend it. It's too late.
So you're saying privacy is gone? It's just gone.
It's finished. It's finished. It's gone. I mean, it's like I tried to raise awareness about this, a while ago. Now we have to look at, the biggest danger right now for me is, algorithms and the impact it's already having on us, and artificial intelligence and the impact that's already having on us. There is no way that we don't even know what's put into these algorithms that actually have an impact on who is getting a job and not, who is getting targeted. And now they can target people, with this concept of possible criminal behavior in the future, like Minority Report, except they don't have psychics, they have, but it's also almost like acting psychics, if you know what I mean, because you don't know anything about it. Like, it's just like some random stuff that, and the people that are feeding it don't even know themselves what they're doing. It's just so
let me unpack that a little bit, because you've hit on a couple of points I want to talk to you about. So number one, I'm obviously brought up in London because of my accent, but I've lived in the US for the last 10 years. Coming back to London, as I have done for the last couple of months, I really feel a difference in the attitude towards data and privacy. Europe's about to have its new law that is putting in very strong protections. The US is moving the other direction between kind of businesses and commercial ethics and new governments where there are less and less controls, and it's pretty much the Wild West in terms of what happens with your data. Can you just give me your thoughts around that?
Well,
or am I right or am I wrong? Or
yeah, I mean, it's absolutely true. It's a correct analytics, but the thing is that how we can tackle issues like, when I had the US government go after my metadata, I heard that through Twitter had taken the US government to court to unseal that they wanted to have my metadata, which is sort of my digital shadow, given to them without my knowledge. And so they managed to unseal it so I could take them to court and fight it with some really great lawyers from the ACLU and the Electronic Frontier Foundation. I, of course, lost. But during this process, we found out that there were 3 other companies that we could not get the names of the companies that had actually handed over my data, that did not manage to unseal it. And this is like, what, early 2011 or something. So I was a member of parliament. I was in the NATO Parliamentary Assembly. I was in the Foreign Affairs Committee in the parliament, and we're doing massive, we were fighting the British in regard to ISAF, like the Icelandic government, or, a lot of the people, and particularly, the opposition in the parliament, were fighting the US and the Dutch governments. And at the same time, the US government is basically having access to probably my emails, my Facebook, my, Skype, and so forth. And so thankfully I was aware about this, so I could offer guidelines on protection for the people that were negotiating. But this is, like, for me, such a serious invasion and breach that was actually totally legal into a sovereign nation. So, and this was all in the open, but a lot of people are discussing this did not understand what this means. And so
this would be in the US of federal agents looking at senators and spying on senators.
Yeah, but then, you found out through Snowden, and how they were spying on people at the United Nations and getting even like DNA stuff and things like that. And so
I didn't hear about the DNA stuff, but okay.
Yeah, it's just like, it's incredible. So it's great that the European Union is finally, when it's too late, doing something, because all these companies that are collecting these massive amounts of data are hosted in the United States, and with Apple, storing all their a lot of their service now in China, which is like the worst of all. Like, it's the worst of the worst of the worst when it comes to invasion of privacy and consequences of that invasion. It's just like, we have to be realistic, and honestly, I have no idea how we're going to tackle this, but at least I think we have to be a step ahead of the next wave, which is the algorithms and the artificial intelligence.
So let me just go through a couple of questions there as well, because I'm also just aware of time. All right, so number one, you think the European law, is it going to make a difference, or is it not going to make a difference?
In some aspects, definitely going to be making a difference.
Okay.
But in other aspects, I don't think so. I mean, it's like, it's too late.
Okay.
To be honest. I mean, I'm pessimistic because I've just seen how slowly everything happens within the legislative bodies, and in the end, the supreme overlord and God of our lives is law and regulations. And, it's like, it's having a conversation 10 years too late, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
It's
okay.
like...
So the laws, and the understanding as an individual, whether you're in the US or Europe, is there any way you can stop your data if you just want to have a normal lifestyle, going to the US or going to China or going to places where you might not be comfortable? Okay. Yeah. All right. So that's
no, I mean, it's like, and the problem is, and people don't understand this, that what I find to be the most uncomfortable about all of this is that it's not a one-way stream. It's not like they're only getting my data. They're getting the data of everyone that's associating with me, and I'm putting people in danger that connect with me, if you know what I mean. And I find that to be appalling in so many ways. And that, if people connect with me a few times, they are under special scrutiny, and it's like they want you to. Yeah, I mean, it's like, but the good thing is, though, that when all of this was happening, I managed to raise awareness with a lot of members of parliament from all over the world about the situation, and basically just scare them a bit, because that's what you need to do. And the problem we're faced with now is that most members of parliament, remember there are thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of members of parliament in various types of governance, and most of them don't have a clue about technology and its impact on our day-to-day lives. Now that's scary.
Yeah, no, that is, isn't it? And they're very hard subjects to get your head around, and that's what hopefully I'm going to try and help people understand. So I've got a bigger question, slightly more esoteric one, I guess. Mm-hmm. How do you police the cloud then? It's the question I just was thinking about a couple of days ago. If all these actions, whole businesses, governments are all in the cloud, do we need police bots and police AI guiding in there? Do you mean, because it doesn't feel like paperwork, regular regulators regulating, talking to people work. It feels like, I don't know, you tell me, what are your viewpoints around that? Okay, so originally the poet in me sort of thought of the cloud as a cloud, you know what I mean? But you know, in reality, the cloud is just servers in different countries. It might even be your server, and so we don't need artificial intelligence to police the cloud at all. What we need is to recognize that a lot of the criminal activity on the internet is exactly the same time of criminal activity offline. You know, it's just, it's changed exactly the way it's changed with the way we communicate and the way we do business with Amazon. I was just watching, you know, a documentary on the opioid epidemic in the US. And the journalist, he could order fentanyl directly from China, just into his own mailbox. And this is like a hugely, it's like 1 grain can kill you, you know, and you can just order it via mail. And that's not even deep darknet. This is like the deadliest drug in the world, and you can order it from China directly. And so, you know, the only way we're going to police the various stuff that are hosted, and I don't really understand, because for me the cloud is just basically you move stuff into another server. It's not really a cloud, and I think it is it's a misguided word, because it gives you a different sort of a wrong idea about what it is. So basically all data is hosted in different countries, but we're seeing increased breaches into this data. So for example, recently, all the data, I think it was in Norway, of patients was hacked and leaked. And so this is something I warned about for years, for decades now, that, you know, I remember I was meeting with the former president of Iceland, discussing this with him, you know, how secure is the data of patients, who is hosting it, what are the requirements, what to host it, and now we have Internet of Things that are connecting. That's the weaknesses. So what I'm saying is that we need some of the brightest and best people in our world to think about how to solve a lot of these issues that we're dealing with in order to protect democracy, because you know, and democracy is based on the demos in it, which are the people. And technology is awesome, it's beautiful, it can really transform our societies, but it can also be a very dangerous tool. Just like the darknet, it can be full of horrible things, but also amazing things. You know, it's not, it's like, it's just, when you talk about darknet, or, you know, people think that it's only a place where you buy guns and for hire murderers. So that's okay. So in terms of what you're saying, it sounds like international regulation is maybe the way to go, international police. So it's more like we need UN level laws around data and protection.
We have it. You know, in some ways, not about data, but about privacy and, you know, local watchdogs and global. I actually took a resolution from the United Nations and another resolution from the Council of Europe, and I fused these two together. And these were both on privacy. It was inspired by Snowden's first interview, where he basically said, in order to ensure privacy, you have to do 3 things: local laws, global laws, and encryption. And so I decided to try to address these sort of global and local legislative questions. And I got to write this resolution based on these two and a lot of other stuff, but this is where it was rooted. I wrote a resolution for the International Parliamentary Union, which has 166 countries, 1,000 members. And I got Snowden and people from the EFF to look it over, and various other people, and it has a lot of very useful tools, and on how to tackle a lot of these things. Not illegal data, but it's more about government and corporate accountability in regard to information. And in the end, this is what we host in the cloud. It's information. And so I'm more concerned about laws that protect those that are hosting data from being all of a sudden editors. It's like, demanding, if you're hosting stuff in a storage, then you want the person that has the storage to go into every room that is in the storage to check if it's possibly something illegal there.
Yeah,
people would find that to be totally unacceptable, and particularly those that are just collateral in this invasion.
Okay, I mean, I really get what you're saying. I think regulation is important. I've worked in enough startups where I know no matter how morally right people are, when the pressure is on, they end up doing with what they can get away with and what they think is within the law rather than what is morally right. So look, we're coming towards, we've been speaking for a while. Oh, and have we lost you? Oh no, I've lost the internet for a second, but it's good. I get a notion of what concerns you. I don't know if there's anything I've not touched about what concerns you, but what excites you about the possibilities? Let's have some positivity. What do you think? Yeah. What would you like to see happen if you could guide the world a certain way with the new tech that we have? What would you like to see?
I would love to see other people get to experience some of the awesome things we experienced here when we're going through the constitutional process, like when we're having this randomly selected assembly where 1,000 people were randomly selected from our national registry to have a deep discussion about who we are. I think it's very important that we start there, and I think it would be awesome if we would do this, for example, before the European elections for the EU Parliament, that, all these European countries, that they would do these assemblies where they would ask people, what do you want the European Union to be like? Because it's like a crisis time there. So you'd have, all these different voices that you would never hear, like from all these different types of society.
So actual town hall meetings, in the US, they're really big, but they're big as TV events. You're actually talking about...
Not town hall meetings. No, not town hall meetings like that, because that's usually, there is like, when you have the town hall meetings, you have people that you are directing your anchor to very often. Like this is what you see on the TV now, right?
Yeah.
No, I'm talking about assemblies where you randomly select people to talk about, bigger questions. Because, if we would have an in-depth discussions and debates on, for example, what do you want to fix in your society, then you would get a lot deeper understanding on prioritizing, because it's not just words, if you know what I mean. Like, if you want people to prioritize the budget, in Iceland, for example, the Pirate Party asked before the budgeting every year through a Gallup poll, how do you want to prioritize the state budget? And, almost everybody put the healthcare system in the first seat and the state church in the last, right? And so why doesn't the budgeting reflect that in, future, I'm not saying that if you prioritize budgeting that you have to do it exactly, but you can have a long-term vision. So another thing I would love to see our societies do is like long-term vision work on, like, that is not just not just in the technology world, because technology is not going to solve our problems. This is one of the things that Maria Bookchin said very clearly about the big questions on ecology later on, as they have been unfolding. So you have to have these two things work together, society and technology. And I would love to see people work much more deliberate collectively together, both locally and globally. We are a global family, I've always considered myself as a citizen of the world rather than just Icelander. I'm very appreciative of having grown up in a culture that has like 300,000 people in it, and we're as rare as penguins, but it's
But it seems like, to have your vision, people need to understand what the technology can do and what it can do for good and what it can do for bad. I mean,
and I mean, it's like, blockchain can solve a lot of things, but it's also just a tool. And so when we talk about, like, there's been some discussions about circular economy and how we can reuse things more, and how we need to get out of this gridlock of this sort of growth idea. So
why not the concept of late stage capitalism, where capitalism is all about making more money each year, but the planet, we're hitting the roof of the planet's resources. Is that what we're talking about? Okay.
Absolutely. And I also think, like, for me personally, I've often lived below poverty, and often by choice, and because I want to be able to do stuff that I love to do too. For me, it's important that we hold corporations accountable. I want to be able to buy a printer that actually lasts for 50 years because we have the technology to do that. I want the frame around it to last for a long time, and then I just want to put a new tech into this frame. We need to, in the future, we're seeing a lot of amazing solutions. There are shops that only sell reuse stuff. There are shops that are encouraging less waste of food. We need to teach people how to do things again themselves. I have a garden now that I'm experimenting with all types of vegetables, and just this feeling when you get the potatoes out of the ground, it's a very good feeling. I mean, it's like, wow, hey, me and Mother Earth did this together. So,
it's about having government at this really high level to allow you just to lead an enjoyable life.
I mean, it's like there are lots of societies. There were some numbers, I think 70% of everyone on this planet, because we tend to just think about our own near environment, are without governance, in the sense that they just run their little communities without this whole infrastructure that we believe is the beginning and the end. I do believe that it's good to have collaboration on, like, obviously one village is not going to build a road out of their village to the city, if you know what I mean, if it's like thousands of kilometers away. But, there must be ways where we can collectively find, different solutions. I don't think there's going to be one type of society. So those that want to live in the, the casino style financial society where you get like really high on making a lot of money on other people's backs, they can do that. They can just go on and live in that society, but I don't want to be part of that. Can I have that choice? No, not yet. But maybe in the future we can develop different styles of experimentations with, how we require.
Lots of communities acting their own way, cooperating, but okay, that sounds good.
We can have like even cities. I mean, most people like to live in cities. We can have, like now we have all these different neighborhoods, like in London. I mean, it's like all these villages really that are sort of connected. And they're actually much more, independent in many ways. I mean, but in the heart of it, you have like the biggest tax haven, in the city of London or whatever it's called.
That's cool. So look, I've got a bunch more questions that maybe you should leave for another day. It's a whole other conversations. Yeah. But do you feel like there's anything we haven't touched on that's really important? Anything I should be aware of as I move forward, or have we covered it all?
I think like a lot of people feel that you know, they have to come up with a whole new vision themselves, and I always tell people, look, no, you know, you can have the frame. I mean, the frame is really written in Imagine by John Lennon. This is what a lot of people dream of, you know what I mean? And so, you know, it's our task to just, you know, create the blueprint and then, you know, allow it to sort of unfold collectively. No one person, if one person believes they have solution to everything, run away very fast, because, you know, nobody does. We do this together, you know.
So it's about being a community. That's really good. Look, it's been an absolute pleasure. I think we've been talking for an hour, so I think it's probably time to just to close it up. But thank you so much for your time. It's been a pleasure. I will hit you up by email more and follow up. I normally try and put these up within a couple of hours, but I'm about to walk out the door, so this will go up tomorrow unedited, and then we'll put highlights up at another time. So I'll send you an email afterwards, but thank you very much for your time.
Yeah, thank you, and let's stay in touch. I would love to see how this unfolds, and you know, if there is anything, just let me know, because it's important to collect this information. You should really try to get to speak to the mayor of Seoul in South Korea.
Okay.
He is a man with a vision as well, and yeah, I mean, next time I'll give you lots of hints.
Okay, look, this is still going. It's still what I'm going to put up on YouTube, so I'm going to close it there. And thank you for your time, and we'll talk by email or messenger or whatever else. Thank you. Have a great weekend.
Yeah, you too. Okay, ciao.
Bye.